Chapter 5 The Material and Sources of Dreams. Still the psychologically process by which, according to our exposition, in different experience substitutes itself for the psychologically important one seems to us odd and open to question. Here we are concerned only with the result of this process, which we were compelled to accept by constantly recurring experiences in the analysis of dreams. In this process, it is as though in the course of the intermediate step, a displacement occurs, let us say, of the physic accent until ideas of feeble potential by taking over the charge from ideas which have a stronger initial potential reach a degree of intensity which enable them to force their way into consciousness. Still the psychological process by which, according to our exposition, the indifferent experience substitutes itself for the psychologically important one seems to us odd and open to question. Here we are concerned only with the result of the process, which we were compelled to accept by constantly recurring experiences in the analysis of dreams. In this process, it is as though in the course of the intermediate steps, a displacement occurs, let us say, of the psychic accent until ideas of feeble potential by taking over the charge from ideas which have a stronger initial potential reach a degree of intensity which enables them to force their way into consciousness. Such displacements do not in the least surprise us when it is a question of the transference of affective magnitudes or of motor activities. But if by the same means and in accordance with the same fundamental principles, a decision is made as to what is to reach our consciousness and what is to be withheld from it, that is to say, what we are to think. This gives us the impression of morbidity, and if it occurs in working life, we call it an error of thought. We may here anticipate the result of a discussion which will be undertaken later, namely that the physic process will have recognized in dream displacement proves to be not a morbidly deranged process, but one merely differing from the normal, one of a more primary nature. Such displacement do not in the least surprise us when it is a question of the transference of affective magnitude or of motor activities, but if by the same means and in accordance with the same fundamental principles, and a decision is made as to what is to reach our consciousness and what is to be withheld for it, that is to say, what we are to think, this gives us the impression of morbidity. And if it occurs in waking life, we call it an error of thought. We may here anticipate the result of a discussion which will be undertaken later, namely that the physical process which we have reorganized in dream displacement proves to be not the morbidity Darwin process, but one merely different from the normal one of a more primary nature. Thus, we interpret the fact that the dream content takes up remnants of the trivial experience as manifestation of dream distortion by displacement, and we thereupon remember that we have recognized this dream distortion as the work of a censorship operating between the two physical instants. We may therefore expect that dream analysis will constantly show us the real and psychically significant source of the dream in the event of the day, the memory of which has transferred its accentuation to some indifferent memory. This conception is in complete opposition to Robert theory, which consequently has no further value for us, Thus, we interpret the fact that the dream content takes up remnants of trivial experiences as manifestation of dream distortion by displacement, and we thereupon remember that we have recognized this dream distortion as the work of a censorship operating between the two psychic instance. We may therefore expect that dream analysis will constantly show us the real and psychically significant source of the dream in the event of the day, the memory of which has transferred its accentuation to some indifferent memory. This conception is in complete opposition to Robert's theory, which consequently has no further value for us. The fact which Robert was trying to explain simply does not exist. Its assumption is based on a misunderstanding, on a failure to substitute the real meaning of the dream for its apparent meaning. A further objection to Robert's doctrine is as follows. If the task of the dream were really to read our memory by means of a special psychic activity of the slag of the day's recollection, our sleep would performance be more troubled, engaged in more strenuous work that we can suppose it to be, judging by our working thoughts. For the number of the indifferent impressions of the day against which we should have to protect our memory is obviously immeasurably large. The whole night would not be long enough to dispose of them all. It is far more probable that the forgetting of the indifferent impression takes place without any active interference on the part of our physical powers. The fact which Robert was trying to explain simply does not exist. Its assumption is based on a misunderstanding, on a failure to substitute the real meaning of the dream for its apparent meaning. A further objection to Robert's doctrine is as follows. If the task of the dream were really to read our memory by means of a special psychic activity of the slag of the day's collections of sleep would perform be more troubled, engaged in more strenuous work, that we can suppose it to be, judging by our waking thoughts, for the number of the indifferent impressions of the day against which we should have to protect our memory is obviously immeasurable large. The whole night would not be long enough to dispose of them all. It is far more probable that the forgetting of the indifferent impressions takes place without any activity, interference on the part of our psychic powers. I shall now consider the question whether the dream excited source to which our analysis leads us must always be a recent event, or whether a subjective experience, that is to say, the recollection of a psychologically significant event, a train of thought, may assume a role of a dream stimulus. The very definite answer derived from numerous analyses is as follows. The stimulus of the dream may be a subjective transactions. Subjective transaction which has been made recent, as it were, by mental activity of the day. I shall now consider the question whether the dream exciting source to which our analysis leads us must always be a recent event, or whether a subjective experience, that is to say, the recollection of a psychologically significant event, a train of thought, may assume the role of a dream stimulus. The very definite answer derived from numerous analyses is as follows. The stimulus of the dream may be a subjective transaction which has been recent, as it were, by the mental activity of the day, and this is perhaps the best time to summarize in schematic for the different conditions under which the dream thoughts are operative. And this is perhaps the best time to summarize in schematic from the different conditions under which the dream thoughts are operative. The source of the dream may be a recent and psychologically significant event which is directly represented in the dream. A recent and psychologically significant event which is directly represented in the dream. Several recent and significant events which are combined with the dream in a single whole. Several recent and significant events which are combined by the dream in a single whole. One or more recent and significant events. One or more recent and significant events which are represented in the dream content by allusion to a contemporary but indifferent event. One or more recent and significant events which are represented in the dream content by allusion to a contemporary but indifferent event. A subjective significant experience. Subjectively significant experience, recollection, train of thought, which is constantly represented in the dream by allusion to a recent but indifferent impression. a subjective, significant experience, recollection, train of thought which is constantly represented in the dream by allusion to recent by indifferent impression. As may be seen, a dream interpretation, the condition is always fulfilled. That one component of the dream content repeats a recent impression of the day of the dream. The component which is destined to be represented in the dream may either belong to the same circle of ideas as the dream stimulus itself, as an essential or even an inessential element of the same, or it may originate in the neighborhood of an indifferent impression which has been brought by more or less abundant association into relations with the sphere of the dream stimulus. The apparent multiplicity of these conditions result merely from the alternative that the displacement has or has not occurred, and it may be here be noted that this alternative enables us to explain the contrast of the dream quite as readily as the medical theory of the dream explains the theory of states from the partial to the complete working of the brain cells. As may be seen in dream interpretation, the condition is always fulfilled that one component of the dream content repeats a recent impression of the day of the dream. The component which is destined to be representing the dream may either belong to the same circle of ideas as the dream stimulus itself, as an essential or even an inessential elements of the same, or it may originate in the neighborhood of an indifferent impression which has been brought by more or less abundant associations into relations with the sphere of the dream stimulus. The apparent multiplicity of these conditions results merely from the alternative that a displacement has or has not occurred, and it may be noted that this alternative enables us to explain the contrast of the dream quite as readily as the medical theory of the dream explains the theory of states from the partial to the complete working of the brain cells. In considering this series of thoughts, we note further that the psychologically significant but not recent element, a train of thought, a recollection, may be replaced for the purpose of dream formation by a recent but psychologically indifferent element, provided the two following conditions are fulfilled. The dream content preserves a connection with things recently experienced. The dream stimulus is still a psychologically significant event. In a single case, both these conditions are fulfilled by same impression. If we now consider that these same different impressions which are utilized for the dream as long as they are recent, lose this qualification as soon as they are day, or at most several day order, we are obliged to assume that the very freshness of an impression gives it a certain psychological value for dream information, somewhat equivalent to the value of emotionally accentuated memories or trains of thought. Later on, in the light of certain psychologically consideration, we shall be able to divine the expression divine, able to divine the explanation of this importance of recent impression in dream information. In considering this series of sources, we note further that the psychologically significant but not recent element, a train of thought, a recollection, may be replaced for the purpose of dream formation by a recent but psychologically different elements, provided the two following conditions are fulfilled. 1. The dream content preserves a connection with things recently experienced. The dream stimulus is still a psychologically significant event. In a single case, both these conditions are fulfilled by the same impression. If we are consider that these seeming different impressions which are utilized for the dream as long as they are recent lose their qualification as soon as they are a day or at most several day older, we are obliged to assume that the very freshness of an expression gives it a certain psychological value of dream formation, somewhat equivalent to the value of emotionally accentuated memories or trains of thought. Later on, in the light of certain psychological consideration, we shall be able to dive the expression of this importance of recent impressions in dream informations. According to the text, what leads to the dream distortion? Remnants of trivial experience, some in different memories, a censorship operating between the two psychic incidents. What's the author's attitude toward robot theory? Robot theory has great value for the robot theory is based on fact. He does not favor a theory. Which of the following is true about one component of the dream content represented in the dream? The component and the dream stimulus belong to different circles of ideas. The component has its origin in different impressions. The component does not have any association with the